need for the Afro-Americans to formulate their identity versus the larger American society had a tendency to spread to other groups.
It did spread. And it, first of all, even spread among blacks, because you have to realize in the civil rights movement, the blacks were asking for just what everyone else had, equality. We were going to be treated just like everyone else. But very rapidly, other things emerged, such as there is black culture, there's black history. We want it recognized. We want it to be noted. Maybe one of the reasons our kids do so badly in school is that there is no attention to that distinctive black history, tradition. And after all, that is, the blacks were 12% of the population, very substantial number. And then...
and that got recognized. That got recognized by
that was
by
recognized.
Society,
it was recognized. In fact, very rapid recognition in colleges and universities, black studies programs, in our education system, public education system is under the states. But in state after state, new curricular development so that we have to teach more about blacks.
Yes.
And not only for blacks, but for whites too.
So there wasn't one American history, but there were at least two American history.
Well, we have to look at it and revise it, you know. We have, and you might say the purely celebratory side of American history was reduced. You know, after all, America thinks of itself, and in large measure is a great success. So it wins all wars, you know, at least
not all,
until the 70s.
Most of them, yes.
So it, you know, it's the best country. You know, it's filled with this kind of excessive pride, I suppose, from the point of view of other countries and some. At any rate, all that became somewhat modified. We had to consider the problem of slavery. We had to consider the problem of discrimination afterwards. We had to consider how a society. What society owed blacks and why they were a distinctively depressed group.
But from the blacks, then, if we come to the present-day situation, this was seen by other groups who had come recently or less recently, and they said, why? Why should the blacks have special attention?
True too.
Why shouldn't we have special curricula in school?
I think certain things then happened which are very parallel to Europe, whether they... you might say a general expansion of demand for respect. That is the way I interpret demand and the acknowledgement. You know, it's a very funny thing. Acknowledgement simultaneously of difference and of equal rights. In other words, yes, we are different, and yes, we demand what everyone else has. And you can work it out. So that's
some special arrangement with the society, some preferential treatment.
Well,
some special
at least some. Like in the case of the women's movement, it wasn't preferential treatment that they didn't describe it as such. But why shouldn't 50% of the doctors be women, 50% of the lawyers, 50% of the legislators, and so on? Now they didn't have the same kind of legal protection that blacks did, but they had a great deal of. But they went through a kind of revolutionary change of opinion, and I think it happened in many countries. And so I would say that you know, we use the term multiculturalism to describe this recognition of the black demand for respect. And can you call women a subculture? But we throw in women's demands into the field of multiculturalism. That was the second largest effective change. And then a third, which was other immigrant groups. Not all of them. The older immigrant groups, in my judgment, are fully assimilated and
Swedes, Italians, Poles, Irish.
A bit of symbolic recognition is all they need. You know, a stamp to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first immigrant ship.
So with those old groups, the whole thing worked fine. Everyone.
But then a lot of new people were coming in, and there the issue was not only newness, but also difference of race or of something like race, because the dominant elements among the immigrants who expanded greatly after an important legislative change in the 60s and expanded to the 70s and 80s, the dominant groups were Latin American, and you say, well, that's not a different race, but as a matter of fact, if you think of Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, very heavily mixed with both the original Indian population.
So they look different.
They look different. Mexicans look different, right? Yes, and then a lot of Asian groups on the basis because law changed and we permitted the immigration of the more skilled among Asians, so Chinese. Japanese were not coming. Japanese are prosperous, but there were the Chinese, there were the Asian Indians, and then with the Korean War, we had a deep involvement with Korea.
In the Vietnam War, you had Vietnamese coming,
even before
Cambodians
even
coming.
before we changed the immigration law, we had tens of thousands of Korean immigrants because they married American soldiers. And then, of course, we had, the Korean population, and the Vietnamese, the Laotian, the Cambodian. So with all there was to some extent the notion of multiculturalism began to affect them too. Not to the same extent as the blacks. We have not responded the same way. But at least for the larger Hispanic groups, like the Mexicans, who are, a number now probably 15 to 20 million in the United States.
Professor Glazer är förstås amerikan, professor vid Harvard University. Men han har också studerat förhållandena i Europa på utbildningens område och när det gäller minoriteters rättigheter och möjligheter att assimilera sig i samhället. Och han finner stora skillnader mellan USA och Europa. I USA försöker nästan alla invandrare att bli amerikanare så snabbt som möjligt. Lära sig språket, se ut som amerikanare, käka amerikanskt och så vidare. I Europa är det mera komplicerat. De som kommer hit behåller ofta sin kultur och sitt språk mycket längre, och det skapar faktiskt en hel del problem.
There is a common story which is a success, namely the merging of peoples. And here what this new development suggested, promised, or many feared would be the disuniting. Each group as a separate corporate group demanding this right, that right, and the breaking up of a pattern which on the whole most Americans approved of and thought was very successful. That is the pattern of assimilation. You learn English, by the second generation they don't even remember the language anymore. Third generation they certainly don't remember it. Everything changes, you become an American. And there was so much fear that this would not continue. Now my view was that it does continue, even though we're not pushing it the way we used to in the schools, in public statements, in programs. American culture is so assimilative by its character that
by its ability to produce success, isn't it?
Well,
economic mobility.
It offers channels.
And isn't it so that when it doesn't, you have the tendencies...
Well, when it doesn't, then you might have this... but, we're not talking about universal... we're not talking about groups, we're talking about averages. In every group there were successes.
Of course, I understand that. But if the group as a whole perceives that that now things are closing, maybe my children will not have a better life than I had, then perhaps these disuniting tendencies might reinforce themselves.
See, I think it operates a somewhat different way. I think it's mostly ideological leaders who call for this distinctiveness, maintenance of culture. I think rather the more common view is the demand for inclusion. In other words, the fact that we are not doing so well means that there are things society should be doing to move us into its center more effectively, like improving our schools, which doesn't necessarily mean teaching more Spanish in them, fighting discrimination through law. In other words, there were inclusionary. The inclusionary demands, I think, are more important than the distinctive separatist ones.
Let's come back and ask ourselves whether this promise of the United, this inclusive promise of America, will hold. But if you compare this to Europe, Europe is a continent that sort of starts at the other end. It starts from a strong sense of homogeneity in each nation state, and it is now forced or willingly or non-willingly to find a system where diversity can be